610.015 Missouri Sunshine Law provides that members of the council who are not physically present in council chambers can participate and vote on all matters when emergency exists, and the nature of the emergency must be stated in the minutes. So I'm asking that Lori include in the minutes that we are still, unfortunately, in this COVID-19 pandemic. The city council is meeting remotely in order for their own safety, as well as the public safety of all of the residents.
Thank you, John. All right. We have a motion to approve our January 7th work session minutes.
So moved.
There a second?
Second.
All right. Any questions or comments on the minutes? All right. Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. Minutes are passed. Our one order of business in the open session is a discussion of the procedures for adopting zoning code amendments. As we all know, back in back on our December 10th work session minutes, our work session meeting, so we talked about needing to move forward on the zoning code amendments. Actually, and Mr. Hessel told us we were required to move forward. However, we basically decided that we were going to move forward, except for the few high profile items such as the B2 building heights and some of the residential items like floor area ratio and setbacks. So what we're going to do, which will be dealt with at a later time specifically by themselves. So what we're going to do today, or what I assume Jonathan's going to do, is it's going to be a tedious process because of how the zoning code amendments were made. It was all basically one big effort. So Jonathan's going to walk through what process that we will have to take for amendments when we finally get to it at a regular council meeting. So again, this is just on procedures. We won't be talking about any zoning code amendments tonight. This is strictly procedures for how we'll deal with this at the council meeting. So Russ, you have anything to add before we go?
No, I think you described it quite well, and Jonathan is ready to go, I believe.
All right, Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think the only additional information that I provided to Lori in preparation for this was a draft ordinance that you hadn't seen previously. And I'll reference that a few times. Like most of our ordinances, it has the various whereas clauses that take you through if you want a refresher on the timeline of the project and all that. That's a good reference for what all actions have brought us to where we are today. And I think I'm going to try to keep this pretty high level and pretty general, and then I'll be obviously be able to answer questions. But what I wanted to make sure everyone, because it has been the project's been stretched out and it does have so much content in it, I'm going to start with the draft ordinance, right? That will be we've already held the public hearing, so the ordinance that will be put on the agenda will have, I don't have the number yet, but it will have a number, right? And so the first action would be a motion to approve ordinance X with a number, right? And that ordinance is like the mayor mentioned, an all-encompassing ordinance that is, and it's in the title there, readopting the provisions of Chapter 2, Article 7, Divisions 3 and 9. I'll stop there. Those are the ARB and Board of Adjustment structure pieces. It lays out how those boards are built and how they operate, right? So this ordinance would readopt those procedures. And then it goes on to Chapter 5, which is Article 2, which is the sign code, right? So there are really kind of four documents that we're going to talk about that are included in this. So you have the Board of Adjustment kind of bylaws, not bylaws, sorry, the code that establishes that board, the code that establishes the Architecture Review Board, the sign code, and then the fourth item is what is in the draft code referred to as Chapter 25, and that's the zoning and subdivision regulations together. So a motion to approve this ordinance was a motion to approve the drafts of all of those pieces of code as they came from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Okay, so, and what has, and I'm gonna, hopefully this is gonna help. I'm gonna share my screen and show the project website. If you can let me know if you all see this.
We got it.
So, all right, great.
Yes, sir.
So, and this is just the real reason, I mean, this is a good resource for you all, but just, I wanted to point out too, this has been up since the beginning of the project, the whole website, right? And this is what the public sees too. So what I'll remind people, if you can see on the right-hand side of this page, it says public review drafts, February 11th, 2020, right? And so it talks about, it was revised, the public hearing was held on February 27th, et cetera, et cetera. And then partway down there, it kind of describes amendments that came out of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then those 4 links are the 4 current drafts that came out of the Planning and Zoning Commission and are proposed to you all for consideration. So this ordinance would adopt those 4 documents as they sit, right, without any amendments to the ordinance or to these chapters. So, and what I've referenced before is these are the 3 big pieces are, I don't know if you can still see my screen or not, right? So most of you got the big binder in December of 2019, right? And so in the draft ordinance itself, there are, if you look after in the second half of the ordinance, there's section 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those all reference the 4 pieces of code that I just introduced, and they each have their own date by them. The dates are highlighted right now because those will change ultimately with the second and final reading. What we'll have is a new dated version, probably dated the night of adoption, really, that would be encompassing all any amendments that occur. But the reason I put the dates in there now is it shows the board, the architecture review board under section 1 is December 17th. So let's see if you're still seeing, are you still seeing my screen as I click through?
Yes.
Okay. So and you should, these were attached, these changes were also attached to my memo in February 20th of 2020. And they were redlined slip sheets that I provided to you all to add to your December, right? So you should have received that hard copy. If not, though, the reason I'm showing you the website is the red line changes out of P&Z are all in these copies, okay? So this is the board, architecture review board. And if you note there at the bottom, it says review draft 12/17/19. So that's the date currently in the ordinance. Same thing for Board of Adjustment, dated 12/17/19 at the bottom. Now, when you get to, this is the sign code, it's review draft 2/11/2020, right? So that's why that date is in the draft ordinance. So you know you're looking at the right document. And these changes out of P&Z to the sign code were definitional, so you can look at those. I know we're not going into content tonight, but, and then the same with the subdivision. And so the subdivision and zoning code were combined. They were Appendix A and Appendix B in our current code. We combined them into one development regulation chapter, which is pretty common these days. And it's chapter 25 of our code, so it's no longer an appendix, it will be a chapter. And you see there the bottom, review draft 2/11/2020. So those are the most current drafts that you should be referring to and would be or are referenced in the ordinance. I'll stop sharing my screen here. So when the ordinance is brought to the table, that's what would be under consideration. From there are obviously since February, since the public hearing, there's been a number of items. The mayor mentioned a few things that you all have discussed about reverting back. So anything, even the actions to revert that the council has discussed between February and now, those all need amendments, right? Because you are considering the draft from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I won't go into detail, but the memo that I provided on December 8th in preparation of that work session in December provided I think a fairly exhaustive list of various amendments that people have brought to my attention or staff has wanted to raise as well. So As the mayor mentioned, it is because we're talking about close to 300 pages of code, it shouldn't be, by no means do I see it a failure that we would have potentially multiple amendments. I think it's very healthy in a process this large. But just so everyone knows, right, the motion to approve is for the draft out of P&Z, and amendments would need to be made and voted upon to make changes from that. So then procedurally, mechanically, our intent is to take any amendments made during the first reading meeting, incorporate those, right, into the final draft, get the new date on it, have the ordinance reflect that new draft, and bring that to you all, obviously, for the second vote. I believe that's where I will leave it, if there's any questions.
Yeah, the thought on that, Jonathan, and thank you for that, that when we do have first reading on this, and right now, I think we're going to have first reading at our first meeting in February. Laurie, that would be February.
Fourth.
Do you have the
It'd be
date?
February 4th.
Okay, so right now, that's the plan. So that night at the first reading, either I or I might ask Councilmember Ward, because he was on the steering committee, maybe we'll walk through the motions, but I haven't even talked to Wallace about that yet. I may just sit down with Russ and Jonathan and maybe Amy and just make sure we have it, because it'll be pretty tedious. It'll just be motions to amend certain parts that can be made and seconded. Again, with the intent being to adopt the amended zoning code, taking the residential and the B2 building heights back to where the current code is, so we can those can be addressed on their own. So what I would probably suggest doing is, if there are specific questions on anything in the code, maybe if there's time between now and February, people can ask, Russ and Jonathan, Amy, if there are specific questions on the zoning code, on the contents of it. I think by now we've probably forgotten more than we know, just because of the length of the process. But I would suggest doing that if Russ is okay with that, having council do that.
Yeah, I
think
would say if they have specific questions about the code, certainly just copy me in on the email to Jonathan,
Yeah.
as we discussed previously, just so I'm aware of what's being asked.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's just probably gonna be fairly tedious, but Jonathan has seems to have laid it out perfectly, and that'll get out to council before the meeting anyway, so that everyone knows what we can expect. So, all right, do we have any questions from council on the process that's going to be undertaken to do this? Am I missing anybody, Laurie? Okay.
Nope.
Very good. All right. Jonathan?
Hey, Tim.
Yes,
Tim.
Walt.
I did have a question on the remainder. John, what do you think is our outside calendar date for the remainder of the codes that we have out there, in terms of responding to the recommendations from P&Z?
Is that aimed at me or Jonathan?
Yeah,
Or
it was at you, at the senior John.
both? Well, thank you. That's what.
John with an H.
You really don't, Wallace, your time is unlimited, because once you make those amendments, you have in essence acted upon the overall recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So you can then act upon the other recommendations. They're going to be taken out of the ordinance, some of them, and then you can act upon them, and I'll just characterize it, in a reasonable period of time under the circumstances.
Okay.
Okay.
How broad is that for you? And I'm putting that way because obviously planning and zoning and completed this work almost a year ago now.
Yeah.
And because of COVID and pandemic, there's a lot of good reasons why the city council has not acted upon with their recommendation yet. But the operative word is yet. So now you'll be acting upon their recommendation in a big context and then separating out some of the other items that you want to look at. Again, it's a reasonable period of time. I don't think we should wait another year, quite frankly, but again, reasonable people can differ as to what that period of time is. So I overstated it when I said it was endless, within a reasonable period of time.
Okay. Yeah, it just doesn't seem that we're gonna, in any time soon, be able to have our standard, everybody in the room meeting. So if we're gonna be virtual for the remainder of this year, probably.
All right.
The code could always be amended though, right? So if, I mean, the B2, I mean, it would just potentially have to go back through P and Z too. If the council has work sessions and you would make a recommendation, ask P and Z to look at it, you know, so it's not that it's never closed, right? The code's still always amendable. Just,
We can,
might have a little more process of going back to P and Z since it's then reopening the subject.
Right, I was answering the question as if it was not going back to P and Z, but Jonathan's 100% correct. As you all know, we can send it back to P and Z for further recommendation and have it come back that way. Again, I'll just point out the hard part about that is that some of the members of the P and Z were not members of the P and Z when they considered it back in February of 2020.
that could happen with any zoning code provision. We could always readdress that. So, all right. Any other questions from council on this? All right. Again, thank you, Jonathan, Amy, John, Russ, staff, everyone who participated. Again, the plan is February 4th for first reading. Very good. Now we need to go into closed session. Is there a motion to go into closed session for legal purposes?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any questions or comments on the motion? All right. Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Councilmember Dewey,
Yes.
Councilmember Zimmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Ward,
Yes.
Councilmember Wertz,
Yes.
Councilmember Gibbons, Yes. and Councilmember Sears is absent.
All right. So now we need to get out of this Zoom and then get back into it under our on the other invite that was sent. So see everybody in just a minute.